end of the war, the major question was how would the defeated Confederacy be treated? Would they treat them as conquered states? Or would they treat them as what they actually came to, as indissoluble states that were a part of an indestructible union? The Constitution is eloquent on who has the power to reconstruct, because we didn't think that anyone would ever have the job of reconstructing. Lincoln, as president, felt that it was the responsibility of the president. And toward the end of the war, he came up with what was called the 10% plan. According to his plan, we were an indestructible union made up of indissoluble states. And these states that had seceded from the Union would need to be reconstructed back into the Union. And when 10% of the people in the, quote, defeated, end of quote, states had taken a pledge of allegiance to the Union, then they would be eligible as a state to come back into the Union. Unfortunately, Lincoln was assassinated, and Johnson became President of the United States. And then there was the struggle: who will reconstruct, the President or the Congress? The Congress came up with a plan that would, in essence, in some ways, punish the Confederacy. The whole of the South was divided into 5 military districts, and a general was in charge of each of the districts. And as those districts adhered to the guidelines established by the Congress, they could be reconstructed into the Union. Now, he did not go with the 10% plan. Those persons who had been leaders in the Confederacy would have to take a pledge of allegiance to the Union, and they would not be permitted to vote or participate in the government that was being established. Then they wanted and insisted that they accept an amendment that legally freed all the slaves, and another that gave the vote to the slaves. Notice what happened then, that as the vote was taken from what had been the leadership in the South, the newly freed slaves were empowered to vote. The Republicans used that to establish their government and helped to put a number of Negroes in office. And in some places, the Reconstruction was very difficult. Now, Reconstruction as a subject in history only lasted for 10 years. And then with the election of 1870, there was a compromise that we will discuss later. But there are several things that I want to mention before David starts talking, and that is the compassion, the sense of leadership and responsibility expressed by Lincoln, particularly in his second inaugural address. And from that address, we have the phrase that we hopefully will come together with malice toward none, charity toward all.
Reconstruction in Georgetown, Reconstruction in South Carolina. Started with the Constitutional Convention of 1868. The convention that the white South Carolinians didn't want. They didn't want to reconstruct a constitution. They had one, and it was working the way they wanted it to work. So they did not want to reconstruct the Constitution, but they had orders from Washington that if you're going to be accepted back into the Union, you have to reconstruct your Constitution to the extent that, as the word is, all men are created equal, that all men have voting rights, property rights, etc., and not just white. But they said that the entire process would be controlled by the number of individuals participating. The whites decided that they would register in large numbers, which they did, but they wouldn't attend the convention. Black registered in large numbers and attended the convention. As a result, the 1868 Constitution of South Carolina was written practically entirely by black. As a result, the 1868 Constitution of South Carolina was written practically entirely by black. As a result, the 1868 Constitution of South Carolina was written practically entirely by black. The first legislature of South Carolina was controlled practically by black because whites stayed away. They made the first law for education, which helped not only the black, but helped the poor whites. South Carolina was an elitist state. The rich and the well-to-do controlled everything. Nothing that passed was sent to the people to approve. The legislature did it. In 1868, Constitutional Convention, a Reverend Richard Harvey Kane, a black minister in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, proposed to the convention that they provide land for the freedmen, that they had all of these slaves out here, but with no property. And that some provision should be made so that they could obtain property. They didn't do it in 1868, but in 1869, they passed a land commission law, and they appointed a land commissioner and 10 sub-land commissioners. The land commissioner was Charlie P. Leslie, a white. The 10 sub-land commissioners, 8 of them were black. One of them was Joseph Rainey of Georgetown, who came back to Georgetown and referral fund purchased nearly 7,000 acres of property. And as a result, that's why you ride through the historical district of Georgetown today and you see black and white living, in a lot of cases, side by side. The historical district is entirely integrated. And as a result, the businesses on Front Street, up until around 1910, the majority of the businesses were owned and operated by black. Because of the strong Republican emphasis in the Republican Party in Georgetown, blacks were elected immediately after beginning with 1868 to all sorts of positions in city government. Reconstruction started in 1867 and lasted until 1877. The fusion plan, which where the whites and the blacks in Georgetown agreed that no group would monopolize any of the elected or appointed positions but would share them equally. It didn't start until 1879. 1879 in the city and 1880 in the city and county. But because of the strong voting power of blacks in Georgetown, blacks were elected to position in the Senate, in the House of Representatives, and the city government from 1868 on to 1902. Reconstruction lasted 10 years. In Georgetown, it lasted but 25 years. And it lasted until September of 1900, when an incident that we'll discuss later on Front Street almost ended up in a riot and brought it to a close. Blacks owned properties, owned businesses. Blacks worked in the government. 3 blacks were probate judges. 3 were postmasters. 1, George Harrod, was superintendent of education from 1880 to 1902. Blacks served in all positions in the city and county government in Georgetown. During Reconstruction and after Reconstruction, because of the strength of the Republican Party in Georgetown. The population, according to Edgar, in Georgetown in 1879 was 82% black. The voting strength of black during that period was 100,000 votes, exceeded the white. Whites had to sign a pledge of allegiance and swear allegiance to the Union in order to be able to vote. And a lot of them just refused to do it. And as a result, they were not allowed to vote. And blacks carried the voting power in South Carolina for a number of years, up until the 1895 Constitutional Convention. When they included, you had to read and write and interpret any section of the Constitution that the registrar gave you in order to be able to vote. You had to pay a tax on property value at $5,000 or more. You could not have been guilty of vagrancy, larceny, petty crimes. If you were found guilty of those, then you couldn't vote. Murder and rape wasn't included. You could be convicted of murder and rape, but you could vote. But those others, and so that eliminated a lot of blacks from the voting roll. And the blacks were incensed when it came to end in 1900 over the Brownfield incident, because they felt that with their number, they should have been able to elect whoever they wanted to anything. Well, they did for a long time. It came to an end in 1900.